Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversation. If we believe that not all is lost in Kashmir, then it is important that we find ways of bringing some peace and normalcy into the Kashmir Valley. The question is, how do we go about making peace with those who are pelting stones against the Indian armed forces and who are raising anti-India slogans in the Kashmir Valley? Of late, many of the official initiatives at making peace in Jammu and Kashmir have not gone down very well. So the question is, are there private initiatives, are there initiatives by private organizations and individuals that are doing a good job in Jammu and Kashmir? To answer this question and to discuss Kashmir in general, I have with me in the studio Ms. Sushobha Bharve. Sushobha Bharve is a seasoned peace builder with an experience in conflict resolution in different parts of South Asia. Sushobha is the Executive Secretary and Program Director of the New Delhi-based Center for Dialogue and Reconciliation. Welcome to the National Security Conversation, Sushobha ji. If I may begin by asking you about the nature of the work that you have been doing in Kashmir for almost 2 decades now, 19 years. If you could tell our viewers what is it that you do in Kashmir and how is that different from what, say, the government is doing within Jammu and Kashmir in terms of conflict resolution?
Well, the organization I work for, its name is Dialogue and Reconciliation. Right. So our work is focused very much on dialogue and reconciliation. When we began our work in Jammu Kashmir, I had no experience of armed militancy. So when my organization asked me to go there and made me in charge of Kashmir work, I had no idea where to begin or what to do. There were some friends, from our board members. Several of them have had long links with Kashmir. So I didn't meet a lot of people. And a couple of us from the organization, we decided, and first 2 years we had set ourselves no program. We decided that we have to go, meet people, understand the ground situation, and then decide what kind of interventions we were going to make. So we literally met people across the political and social spectrum, varied age groups, rural, urban people across the valley.
This was in 2001?
2001 and 2, part of 2001 and 2. And bit by bit we realized that trust building needed to be our focus as a first step. We realized that through the 90s, particularly till mid-90s, there were so many militant groups and Kashmiris, as we talked to them, the theme kept coming up, that they didn't know who stood with whom. Even the relatives didn't know what was happening, And the seeds of suspicion and distrust within the Kashmiri society had gone deep. So, one realized that there is that needed to be healed. Apart from the Kashmiri Pandits who had left the valley and with an exodus gone out, there was that healing that had to come. But even within the Kashmiri Muslim society, there was this. So we started with very small, informal meetings with different groups of people from different professions, gender, starting with sitting rooms of people. I remember the first meeting we had with in the home of a retired college principal, and she invited her former colleagues, her students who were there, and some who were still teaching in different colleges and university. And I tried to think now, I had for almost a year and a half heard, all that had happened, and everybody would say the same thing. We didn't want to spend our time in that group with that. So it was put to the group, about a dozen women, all educated, all working, and that they tell us how the conflict and violence had affected them personally.
Right.
And we would go around the room, which is what happened. Our hostess herself, her husband there was an attempt to kidnap him. There was a wife of a civil servant whose husband was attacked, and for several hours there was a gun battle between where he was, between his bodyguards and the militants, and some of his bodyguards were killed. He was miraculously, rescued and survived.
So these are people from different walks of life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
Pro-militant
telling
symbols,
you, this, my hostess, Kashmiri Pandit woman, but she and her husband, despite that attempt, they stayed on. They're still there in the valley.
This is Madam Nirjama too.
Yeah, Professor Nirjama too. Then the wife of this civil servant, who there was an attempt on his life, and there were threats to their children. So they had to send their children away who were in schools at that time, So they were away from the parents because he was posted there in Valley. So each one went around speaking like that. There was wife of a senior journalist who in fact several bullets were pumped into him, and he survived miraculously. So she told of the whole ordeal the family went through. So each one, they spoke, and they were all tears when each one was narrating her story, And although as one person, she herself was not touched with violence, but she had given protection to many who were threatened or who had to face violence, in many ways, and protected them, saved them. And she said, I knew some of the broad outlines of something that had happened. We never knew the details. And I think that was so for all of them. And these women knew each other. And yet, knowing that the other person had gone through something, out of fear, they had not wanted to reach out, So, as everyone finished talking, there were tears, there was unburdening, but there was also this sense of, I have been listened to, and in turn, they could listen to the others and realize that there was a thread. We have all suffered. Mine is not just a unique case. We've all suffered some way or the other. And then they began to talk about, we are still privileged, we can still call ourselves privileged. And then one woman in the room said that a journalist had told her of a village, Gandarbal, not very far from Srinagar, where there were only widows and children. Why don't we go and meet them to find out how are they surviving? So they decided, as they ended that gathering, that they would make an attempt to go and visit that. It took them several months, but they finally went. They had to walk through, quite a distance to get to that village and met those widows.
You accompanied them?
I went separately on a second trip. And
so this was a group that was put together by your organization in Srinagar?
I had met them all separately. So the first woman who had introduced me, I said, why don't we get them all together? So that's how it happened. So they found out that one group of militants had killed people. It was a weaver's village. They used carpets. They used to weave at home. And slowly, finally, the women admitted that not every man in the village was killed. There were some who survived, but they were for the sake of safety of their families as well as themselves, they were living somewhere else, and the women were there with the children alone. But the children had difficulties because people were afraid of taking them, in the schools. So anyway, the women were able to help in that with their made sure that they got the rations, they got other help that was needed, and the children could continue with their education. That was the beginning.
So did this work that you started in Srinagar, in Kashmir, did that lead to some sustainable relationships and sustainable communities, as it were? Do they survive?
Yeah, I mean, this group of women have continued to be part of our larger team in Kashmir, who have had, organized cross-LOC women's conferences.
Right. Yeah.
We had 3 in J&K, 2 in Kashmir, 1 we had in Muzaffarabad. Yeah. So it's a group that has knitted itself together, and they have grown. They have formed an organization now called J&K Women for Peace. So, and there is a similar organization founded by women who came and attended these cross-LOC women's conferences on the other side in Muzaffarabad, who organized that cross-LOC women's conference in Muzaffarabad. So, this is a women's group. But we also did a similar thing with teachers and professors from high schools and colleges. And we discussed with them, because it started with one professor who has died since, who was extremely worried. He said that our young people have training available in how to use the gun, how to take part in conflict and violence, but there is no training available in how to build peace. That's right. How to communicate what's in their own hearts. In the classrooms, teachers have great difficulty understanding what the students are feeling. We are not able to get them to talk to us, and that's the same thing at home. So it was his conviction, Professor Amin Andrabi, that we needed to create some teaching material to help address the anger, help children to learn to communicate their feelings to their teachers as well as to their parents, and teach them about what does conflict really mean, is it helpful, is it unhelpful, and what are the benefits of peace.
So did you create those teaching aids?
Yes, as they were talking over several meetings they had together, it was a group of about 6 or 7, they kept putting down what are the issues they wanted to see addressed in students and in their own children, at home as well as in the schools, like anger management, communication skill, how do we help the children with that? What is conflict? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? So then we took it up along with them to start creating some modules. In our organization, we had 2 people who were actually doing their doctorate in education,
right,
who came to work with us for 3 months. So we gave them this assignment to help create modules which can be used then in schools and colleges. So they kept discussing with this group of teachers, and we have peace education curriculum. And we had a grant from the HRD ministry to run it. So we ran it for 3 years, from 2003 to 2005. And we held training workshops on these modules, 5-day training workshops for middle school government teachers with the help of the J&K school board, in Kashmir. And then we also carried that in Jammu. But after 3 years, when we did a review workshop and asked the teachers what did they think should happen now, the feedback we got from them was some principals were very willing to back the teachers to bring it into the classrooms. But some principals thought this was a nuisance. They needed to concentrate on, the set curriculum. This is not part of the curriculum. So they discouraged teachers. So majority of the teachers felt that unless it became part of the curriculum in some way, as a separate subject or part of different subjects, it will be very difficult for them to carry this on. Before 2008, 2006-7 to many discussions were held with the J&K government's school board, but somehow it didn't, it didn't happen.
But other than the fact that there was no enthusiasm forthcoming from the J&K government, was there any other opposition that you ever faced, given the fact this was a very sensitive kind of work?
Initially, almost the first day, during a large number of workshops, we had to face this. Why are you holding this? You are doing it to undermine our movement.
That's right.
We don't want peace, we want resolution of Kashmir, so why are you talking about peace? Who has sent you? Are you an agent of the government?
Yeah.
So,
how do you respond to that?
Although we had the trainers were all Kashmiris,
right.
But all these questions I had to answer.
Exactly.
It wasn't easy. Some remained unconvinced, but most of them were willing to sit through the workshop, because in any case they were directed by the authorities to come. So they decided they had to put in their presence there. But by and large, I think bulk of them did find the days and the way the modules were, framed, and the way the trainers approached the subject actually quite interesting.
From an abstract point of view, what would you say were some of the strategies and methodologies that you adopted in your work in Kashmir? If it were to be sort of looked upon as a model that can be replicated elsewhere, so what would you say are some of those?
See, something in my peace building work of over 40 years in different parts of India, and particularly I would say in Mumbai after the Bombay riots, in the most hostile neighborhoods where worst kind of violence had happened, and there was tremendous anger and almost animosity between the communities, where we and also against the police, where we went directly to different communities to start with, and we had open discussions. We let them say what they wanted to. And then Mr. Julio Ribeiro, who had heard of my work during the Bombay riots, he asked me to assist him, because he was asked to set up these mohalla committees. It wasn't the government initiative, but it was a citizens' initiative in Mumbai. So I said, okay. But I said, before we start, I think we should go and meet the police, because a lot of this anger actually is directed against the police. So unless police are sensitized, I don't see how we can bring, reconciliation. So he did take me to meet the then police commissioner, who called all his 5 top officers for that meeting, and we discussed. And at the end of that meeting, it was decided that he would come with us to these community dialogues. So we had a first meeting in a residential home, when about a dozen or so, 14 people, I think 14, 15 people, public figures of largely Muslim community, but there were some Hindus also there. And the commissioner wanted to have a feel, so it was a non-threatening environment of a home where this meeting took place. And so they talked, and there were some people who then challenged him. He said, if you don't believe us, please go and meet. Why don't you start with Mahim? Mahim is the place where Tiger Memon, who plotted that, those terror attacks that happened, serial attacks in Mumbai, that was a police station area. So we decided, okay, we'll have our first meeting there. And we had 3 meetings, we were not getting anywhere. First, to start with, I was doing all the spade work. to convince people to come. I had a medical doctor who was backing me. The elder of the community, community leader who was also backing me. But even they had great difficulty trying to get people. So for the first meeting, we must have had only 9 people. And it took place in a classroom of a school, government school. This group is not representative enough. We need to have another meeting. So we had a larger meeting. People talked. When the commissioner said, I want to try and change things in the city, I need your help, they were not convinced. And then one person, teacher by profession, who was running a school in a very difficult slum, he stood up and said, you said that the terrorist attacks in Mumbai were an anti-national act. We accept that. I don't think anybody in this room will say they were not anti-national act. But would you say that demolition of Babri Masjid was an anti-national act or not an anti-national?
What did the commissioner say to that?
Commissioner was so taken aback. How could he answer? He didn't know how to answer. And the meeting ended in a disarray. And my heart sank. I thought, I don't think we are going to get anywhere with this. And it was my idea. We must have dialogue, if you want to have reconciliation in the city. So I went back that evening, and this elder, of the community from Mahim, he called me and he said, Beta, हार नहीं माननी है. ये अच्छी शुरुआत है. बातचीत बहुत अच्छी हुई. लोगों ने अपने दिल में क्या था वो बता दिया. अब हमें आगे जाना है. So I said, but I don't see any way forward. So he said, वो भी मिलेगा. हम बात करेंगे. So he said that much and he left it. Day after, he called me and said, अब औरतों के साथ मीटिंग करो. So I said, but will they come? Even men are so reluctant to come to meet the police commissioner. So will the women come? He said, नहीं आएंगी, आएंगी, जरूर आएंगी. Anyway, meeting happened. And to our surprise, over 70 women came for that meeting.
So the lesson then is that wide-ranging dialogues matter. But I thought even more importantly, the fact that you invited the police commissioner tells me that perhaps working with the government, working with the officials on some of these conflict issues is very important. It's not as if your work is something that is against the government or against the interest of the government. It's important to work with all sides at the same time. Do you do that kind of work in Kashmir also?
It was a bit difficult in Kashmir because it's an ongoing conflict.
Right.
It was really through those community dialogues that I learned that you have to create spaces, non-threatening spaces for people to feel what is in their heart, whether it is anger or resentment or bitterness or deep pain. They must feel free to share it. It is only after this comes out then you can talk about something concrete to help build peace.
How has Kashmir changed from the time you started your work in Kashmir 19 years ago and where Kashmir is today? Do you think some of the good work that you've done in the 2000s probably has gone down the drain thanks to the uprising and the ongoing insurgency in the valley?
See, it is human to feel discouraged, which is what certainly I felt in 2016 when that terrible uprising happened. I thought, this really is the end. I really didn't see what was the way forward until a Kashmiri journalist called me and told me, all your work has gone down, it's washed away. So I listened to what he had to say and they said, but can we pick up the pieces? So he said, but of course, without a second. He said, but of course we can pick up the pieces.
Right.
But for that, you will have to now work very hard and promise me that you will work hard. So I said, okay, having told me that my work has completely washed away. Now you are saying I have to work hard to rebuild it.
Right.
That gave me a sense that not everything is actually lost.
But given the fact that things have changed so fundamentally since the early 2000s to what it is now, do you think things can be brought back to some sort of semblance of normalcy at this point of time?
See, when I started, it is almost 20 years. A new generation has grown up. Those who were young then, with whom we worked, you know, are today giving in different fields leadership, for instance, you know. So I'm working with them. Yeah. Now, they are also giving me ideas on what is the best way to reach out to young people. So the fundamental idea, even with this new generation of young people who are angry, who don't listen to anyone, the basic idea remains the same. You have to go and talk to them. Right. Listen patiently to what they have to say. In last October, when I went into some of the interior villages in Shopian, in the homes of, you know, militants who were killed just 2 weeks earlier, there was a lot of anger in the families as well as friends who had gathered, you know, in those homes. And they said, I mean, they said such harsh words which I have not heard in the last 20 years of my work. Right. You know, I knew people were angry about India, and it was not easy to face that. But I knew I would, when I went there, I knew I was prepared for it, you know. But you can be prepared, and still when you hear it, it's still not easy to, you know, take it. But the fact that I sat through all that they had to say, their harsh words, and then I said, well, I have come here to share your pain and to offer my condolences to you. I think they were taken by surprise.
So Shobhaji, in many conflict situations, what happens is that you go to a place and people narrate their stories to you, some of which is of course absolutely accurate and true. Some of it is exaggerated, some of it could be just plain lies. How do you deal with that? I mean, so when you're faced with that and when you know that, okay, here is a situation, but what is coming out is not necessarily accurate.
The main thing is you have to listen, yeah. After a while, you also learn that there is some exaggeration, but is there a central point, you know, in what they are narrating? And if I have found that this is serious enough, I have gone back to forces concerned, whether it is civil administration or security forces. In this case, I wrote a report in which I sent it to the GOC. And, you know, I gave 3 instances because I felt people who were narrating, they were credible enough. So let's at least get some inquiry initiated to find out what is the truth. And in all those 3 cases, actually inquiry was held. In one case, they said the officer concerned, you know, what people were narrating was from early 90s when he was part of the Ikhwan group. But he had since then joined the army, and those who knew him from that town, they were weaving stories that things were happening even now. And the army said, no, he's under a very tight leash, it is not. But, you know, they said, thank you for alerting us. In another 2 cases, they did inquire and they found there was truth in it, and that practice has been stopped. Not all the cases did they come back and tell me that they held an inquiry or this is what they found. But if you do that, it also helps to build some kind of confidence in the community. Okay, हमने बात करी, ये आई थी, इन्होंने ये किया.
Right. So Shobhaji, you know, with the angry youngsters in Kashmir taking over the reins of insurgency there, be it pelting stones or guiding the future of the insurgency as it were today, where do you think the Kashmir insurgency is going to go from here on? I mean, not necessarily related to your work, but as an observer of Kashmir, as someone who's been to Kashmir so many years.
I feel right now all the people who have Kashmir in their hearts and empathy for Kashmir need to put our heads together to see how we can end the violence or help prevent more young people from taking up the gun.
So how do we reach out to them? There are no intermediaries. They are not.
No, it's okay. I mean, like I went, I didn't go through any intermediary except my Kashmiri friends. I didn't go at anybody's invitation. And we met no resistance from anybody, including in the homes of the militants who were killed.
And how many districts in the state of Jammu and Kashmir has your organization reached out to?
Well, we've done it in Anantnag, we have done it in Shopian, we visited about 14 villages like this over 2-3 days. Then Anantnag I've been twice and we've done the same, tried to reach out to people. And now there is a group with whom we've had several other meetings. You know, now the thing is, how do we, for each district we may have to have a different plan. We had planned to go to Pulwama, it has not worked, but we have that in mind, you know. Kupwara we have done that. I've spent time in Handwara twice now, but it's a slow work.
You know, something that you said is very interesting. You said that anyone who has the interest of Kashmir in their hearts should actually ensure that the violence stops now. So it is, so if violence stops and if the government of India is serious about reaching out to Kashmir, it is not really end of the road for the Indian state in Kashmir.
I don't think so.
There's a lot of space
because
there even
you
now.
see, in one of the visits in that October, you know, in Shopian, in those interior villages, we got into this discussion. We don't, bharosa nahi hai. India pe bharosa nahi hai. I said, yeah. So, you know, I told them about the Naga peace process, that it began under Narasimha Rao, you know, so long ago. They had first meeting in Paris, and in that first meeting they agreed on 3 things. I told them what those 3 things were. And I said, one of the things that they agreed on was that talks will be unconditional. Now, I said, did that mean that the Naga leaders had given up their demand for independence? You asking for Azadi, they were asking for independence. They didn't give up their demand for independence. Nor did our Prime Minister then say that our discussions will be, you know, the settlement, whatever we reach, will be outside the framework of the Constitution. This was not discussed, but they agreed to unconditional talks. I said, आपने जो बोला, मैं अपने लोगों से जाके बोलूँगी, जो गलत हुआ है वो गलत हुआ है, उनको तो मैं बता दूँगी. लेकिन अगर आप भी मानते हैं कि ये वायलेंस बंद होनी चाहिए, मैं अपने लोगों से बात करूँगी. आप, लेकिन दोनों तरफ से वायलेंस बंद होनी है ना. तो यहाँ आप किससे बात, आप भी जाके बात करेंगे? They didn't get back at me. They took it. They listened to the entire thing of what I told them about the Nagas, that the governments have come over all these years, the Naga talks have continued, and under this government, they have signed a framework agreement. I said, of course, it has not yet been implemented. I don't know what is there in that framework. No, but we have come a long way. So I said, जब समझौते की बात करनी है, तो उसके लिए आपको पता है, मुझे तो पता है कि हमारी तरफ से कौन, हिंदुस्तान गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कौन बात करेगा. आपको पता है क्या कि आपकी तरफ से कौन बात करेगा? आपको भी इसके बारे में सोचना होगा, बातचीत करनी होगी. I left it at that. They were willing to listen. Right. But we must be willing also to, you know,
reach out to them, talk to them without calling them names.
Yeah, without calling them names or having any prejudice.
Here is my final question. What would be your advice to the new government in Delhi, irrespective of the color of the government, as to what needs to be done in Kashmir in order to bring a certain amount of peace and normalcy in Kashmir?
Across the board, I think different leaders of security forces have already talked about the need to initiate some political process. They have said that we will deal with the militants, and no doubt they will. But they feel that is not sufficient, you know. Some of them have said so publicly that we need also to have some political process. You know, General Huda, when he was head of the Northern Command, was the first one to talk about it. Subsequently, others have also talked about it. So what does political process really mean? I think the government, whoever is the next government, actually has to say we are willing to have unconditional talks with the stakeholders. To say we will not talk with the militants, we will not talk with the separatists. Who will you talk to?
In fact, the PDP BJP manifesto in Jammu and Kashmir had exact phrase. They said we will talk to everyone.
Well, interestingly, Congress manifesto also has that in their Kashmir section.
So interestingly, so there is an awareness within the political class and also the security among the security forces.
I think Mamata Banerjee in her manifesto has also talked about, Kashmir, that we need to, have dialogue in Kashmir or something. I forget the exact phrase. But the fact that they have it there in Bengal, this party, has put something on Kashmir in its manifesto itself shows that there is awareness that things can't go on like that in Kashmir.
So now that the elections are over, we have a new government. This is probably the time to begin that conversation. So Shaibaji, wonderful talking to you, and good luck for your work.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.